What happens when a nation stands at a crossroads between rebuilding its soul and repeating its past? In a bold move that shook diplomatic circles and captured global attention, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the transitional leader of Burkina Faso, rejected Saudi Arabia's multi-million-dollar offer to build 200 mosques. But that was just the beginning. Traoré's defiance didn't stop there. He would go on to reject offer after offer from countries eager to influence his nation's future. This defiance attracted enemies from the powerful corridors of Europe, where whispers turned into plans of retaliation. Some wanted to see him silenced, believing his stand threatened the very foundation of their influence over Africa. But why would a struggling nation say no to such generosity? Why risk international retaliation for the sake of sovereignty? This isn't just a political decision. It's a statement of resistance, of sovereignty, and of vision. Traoré's rejection of foreign offers was not only a stand against geopolitical control, it was a refusal to let Burkina Faso fall under the control of foreign interests. As Europe's elite whispered, plotted, and took measures to neutralize him, one man stood tall. In a world where power and influence are traded like currency, Captain Ibrahim Traoré said the impossible. We need schools before steeples. We need factories before minarets. In Ouagadougou, under the hush of diplomatic corridors, Saudi Arabia's proposal arrived. 200 state-of-the-art mosques, fully funded, with salaries for imams and Islamic scholars included. To many, it sounded like a divine answer to a struggling nation's prayers. But to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the offer came wrapped in something heavier, a future his people didn't ask for. Behind the polished language of religious generosity, he sensed a geopolitical play. His advisors urged caution. Some saw opportunity, others saw dependency. The nation watched silently, unsure what to make of it all. And in his office, Traoré sat, holding the proposal in one hand and a map of Burkina Faso's underserved schools in the other. If they can fund 200 mosques, he said slowly, why not 200 schools? He knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but he also knew one truth. Buildings could be built, but minds must be nurtured, and before they laid down the first brick of another mosque, he would force the nation to ask, is this what we need? As he rejected the offer, little did he know, this single decision would set off a chain reaction. Forces across Europe, threatened by his growing influence, would soon begin to take notice. Soon the whispers would not be so quiet, and the path Traoré had chosen would get much, much harder. Captain Traoré carried the burden of a wounded country, one fractured by terrorism, poverty, and corruption. Burkina Faso had survived coups but not direction. His mornings began with reports of displaced families, dying farms, and children studying under trees. The Saudi offer arrived like a golden key to a heavy door, but Traoré didn't want shortcuts. He wanted solutions. In cabinet meetings, ministers debated fervently. The religious faction was thrilled. Others feared ideological control hidden behind walls of marble and gold. The leader listened, spoke little, but observed everything. When silence fell, he rose and walked to the window. We cannot build sanctuaries. While our children sit in the dirt, he said, we need light before sermons. His tone was firm, final. That evening, he called for a national address. Standing before his people, he made it clear, Burkina Faso would graciously decline the offer. Our faith does not depend on architecture. It lives in our actions. If we must build, let it be the future. The words rippled through radios, markets, and villages. Some cheered, others questioned, but all understood. The era of blind acceptance was ending, but not everyone was pleased. Foreign powers had their own agenda, and they were not going to let this defiance slide easily. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat in his modest office, the offer letter from Saudi Arabia laid neatly on his desk. Outside, the sounds of a bustling Burkina Faso reminded him of the people he served, not foreign kings. His advisors waited for an answer. But Ibrahim wasn't a man rushed by pressure. He understood what 200 Saudi-funded mosques could do, politically, religiously, even economically. But he also understood what they represented, influence, a creeping control dressed as generosity. He remembered his childhood village, where tradition and faith blended beautifully. Local elders taught values before doctrine. Prayers were offered under trees, not marble domes. They had little, but they had dignity. That memory pulled at him now. Accepting this offer would be an erasure of local customs, a silent invasion masked as charity. He stood and addressed his advisors. This is not just about buildings, it's about sovereignty. They offer mosques. Tomorrow they may ask for more. Policies, alignments, even submission. We must stand on our own. The room fell silent. Ibrahim's conviction was unshakable. His decision was more than political. It was personal. And his people would soon come to understand the depth of what he was protecting. And yet, as he spoke, the specter of international pressure loomed large. European nations that had long held sway over Burkina Faso's future were now quietly beginning to push back. The stage was set for a clash that could cost Ibrahim everything. News of the rejection spread fast, first among cabinet members, then journalists, then the streets. But not all received it with applause. Foreign-backed media outlets and political elites began whispering, "Why reject free development? Is Ibrahim anti-Islam? Who turns away such generosity?" Ibrahim anticipated the backlash. He knew the storm was part of the strategy. Confuse the people, twist the narrative. He held emergency briefings with local imams and chiefs, explaining the reasoning behind his stand. Faith is not a commodity, he told them, and sovereignty is not for sale. Support trickled in from unlikely corners. Grassroots leaders, youth groups, and even some religious figures praised his decision. But the whispers grew louder. Misinformation flooded social media, painting him as a tyrant or a puppet of the West. Still, Ibrahim did not flinch. He urged the nation to think deeper. Would a foreign power build 200 mosques without expecting 200 doors of access? Behind closed doors, pressure mounted. Western diplomats raised eyebrows. Saudi representatives called for dialogue. But Captain Ibrahim's resolve only strengthened. He wasn't against Islam. He was against infiltration. And for every whisper of doubt he countered with a louder voice of truth. On the heels of the mosque rejection, Captain Traoré launched his boldest policy yet, the National Education and Innovation Initiative. Instead of houses of worship, he committed Burkina Faso to build 200 new schools over the next 5 years. The focus was clear: science, technology, engineering, and agriculture. "We will build mines before monuments," he declared. International agencies watched with interest. Some applauded, others hesitated. But for the children of Burkina Faso, hope took form in chalkboards and benches, not domes and loudspeakers. The program began in the poorest provinces. Each new school bore the inscription, "The future learns here." Scholarships were established, teachers were trained, and for the first time in decades, local industries were invited to invest in curriculum and job placement. But as the schools took root, so did the pressure from external forces. European countries began to send more covert offers, sensing that they were losing their grip on the country. Threats of retaliation became whispers in the halls of power. The world was watching. But Ibrahim's path forward was clear. Education, not manipulation. Burkina Faso's sovereignty would not be bought. As Captain Ibrahim Traoré's education initiative began to take shape, ripples of concern spread through the halls of European capitals. Burkina Faso's rejection of foreign offers had been seen not only as a political move, but a challenge to a decades-old influence that European nations had long held over African affairs. In London, Paris, and Brussels, diplomats and intelligence agencies began to circle, quietly assessing how far Ibrahim's resolve could be pushed. The first signs of pressure came in the form of economic sanctions, minor at first, but enough to send a signal that Burkina Faso's defiance would not go unanswered. Traoré, however, remained unshaken, and his cabinet stood firm, knowing that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But it wasn't just economic pressure. A covert campaign began to emerge, a whisper campaign designed to discredit Traoré on the global stage. His stance on foreign influence was portrayed as radical, even dangerous. International media outlets, subtly influenced by European interests, began to paint a portrait of an unstable leader who was pushing his nation into isolation. But for every negative headline, Ibrahim found a way to counter with the truth. Behind the scenes, European leaders took a more aggressive approach. There were rumors that several European nations had begun to collaborate with Burkina Faso's political opposition, quietly supporting efforts to destabilize the government. A few had even gone so far as to explore the possibility of a coup, though such plans remained veiled in secrecy. Despite the pressure, Ibrahim Traoré's message remained consistent. Burkina Faso would no longer be a pawn in the global game of power. As the tension mounted, Ibrahim received an intelligence report that sent shockwaves through the country. European powers had reportedly begun funding militia groups operating in the Sahel region, using them as proxies to destabilize not just Burkina Faso, but the entire West African region. The strategy was simple: create chaos, and eventually, the people would turn against their leader. The first signs of this began to manifest in the northern and eastern regions of the country, where insurgent groups, once dormant, began to rise again. It wasn't just terrorism, it was a coordinated effort to strike at the very heart of Burkina Faso's stability. Ibrahim knew that this was no coincidence. It was a direct consequence of his refusal to play by the rules of foreign powers. But his resolve was stronger than ever. He called a secret meeting with his military leadership, urging them to take immediate action. "We cannot let them divide us," he said, his voice cold but determined. "This is a fight for our sovereignty, and we will not back down. We will stand united." His forces, loyal and battle-hardened, began a strategic counter-offensive. But even as they engaged insurgents, Ibrahim knew that this was only the beginning. The real battle was far from over, and it was going to get much worse before it got better. As European nations began to tighten their grip on Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré made a decisive move that would alter the course of his nation's future. He turned his focus inward, doubling down on regional alliances. If the West wanted to isolate Burkina Faso, he would create a new web of alliances in Africa, a coalition of nations that shared his vision of sovereignty and independence. In a series of diplomatic maneuvers, Ibrahim reached out to neighboring nations, offering solidarity in exchange for mutual support. Mali, Niger, and several other Sahelian nations, all feeling the weight of Western influence, welcomed the idea of a united front. A new pan-African alliance was born, one that would challenge the established order and demand that African nations take control of their futures. But not all of his neighbors were on board. Some nations influenced by European aid remained cautious, unsure of the ramifications of standing too closely with a leader who was seen as a pariah by the West. Ibrahim, however, was undeterred. He knew that the future of Africa could no longer be dictated by foreign powers. "Our unity is our strength," he said in a televised address, "and no force, foreign or domestic, can break it." As the alliance took shape, Burkina Faso began to receive support from unexpected quarters. China, Russia, and several Middle Eastern nations offered their backing, not out of charity, but as part of a larger geopolitical strategy. They saw Burkina Faso's defiance as an opportunity to weaken Western influence in Africa and to challenge the balance of power on the continent. The international response to Ibrahim's growing influence was swift and decisive. With Burkina Faso now aligned with a new coalition of African and global powers, the Western world faced a dilemma: continue to isolate the nation or find a way to engage with it. The stakes were high, and European leaders were not ready to lose control of a key African nation. In an unprecedented move, the European Union called for an emergency summit to address the growing crisis in Burkina Faso. The meeting was tense, with some leaders advocating for a diplomatic resolution and others pushing for stronger sanctions or even military intervention. As the summit unfolded, Ibrahim Traoré watched from his office, knowing that this was the moment of truth. Would Europe back down and engage on equal terms, or would they escalate the conflict further? He had already made his decision, and there was no turning back now. The culmination of months of political maneuvering and military tensions came to a head when intelligence reports indicated that several European nations were preparing covert operations to eliminate Ibrahim Traoré. The whispers had turned into open threats. Western powers, unwilling to allow one African leader to stand in defiance of their interests, were now actively planning his downfall. But Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just a leader, he was a symbol of resistance. And even as the storm clouds gathered, his resolve only grew stronger. He knew that his people were behind him, and that no matter what the world threw at him, Burkina Faso would remain free. The stakes were higher than ever. Europe wanted to silence him, but Ibrahim Traoré was prepared for whatever came next. As the hunt for him began in the shadows, he stood ready to fight, not just for himself, but for the future of his nation. But as the European powers began their covert operations, something unexpected happened. A traitor in the ranks, a hidden ally in the shadows. The true battle for Burkina Faso's future is only beginning. Did Ibrahim Traoré make the best decision by standing firm? Or is he walking into a trap? Subscribe now and stay tuned for the next chapter, where Ibrahim Traoré faces the most dangerous game of all, survival.